Because we're not even in there, right? So now I'm saying no.
We know where he stands.
Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to this study session of the Clovis City Commission, being held together with the Planning and Zoning Commission and commissioners and Planning and Zoning Commissioners. As you know, recently the state of New Mexico became the 17th state to legalize recreational marijuana. And parts of that new state law actually went into effect yesterday, and many parts, including the retail sales, manufacturing, cultivation, and so forth, all become legal at a later date. That new state law is rather sweeping and does not allow cities or counties to opt out. However, there is some room for a local municipality to develop its own policy in regulation of this new industry in our city. The City Commission will very soon need to develop that policy and approve an ordinance, and that's what today's meeting is about. And we've brought P&Z in because P&Z makes recommendations to the City Commission. And but this evening is all about our commissioners having the chance to gain some knowledge of what's going on, ask questions and have those answered, and get to the place where they understand enough to actually develop and approve a local ordinance related to all of this. I'd like to thank the P&Z Commission for being involved. Appreciate your participation in this. I'd like to thank our attorney, Mr. Jared Morris. He's put a lot of time and effort into understanding this new law and researching it and providing us with resources to help with our own understanding. I think we have folks from the business community here and folks from the public. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your interest. Our format this evening, we'll begin with our city attorney, Mr. Morris, to give us some background and overview of this. We'll go into questions from our P&Z Commission and City Commission, but we will have the opportunity to take input from the public and from business owners as well. That being said, Mr. Morris, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Is the sound coming through okay with the microphone?
It is.
So good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the City Commission, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Just a brief background, because I think I've spoken to most of you in smaller groups or on the phone or individually. But the state, when it enacted HB 2, asserted that it was going to give us some regulations and some guidance specifying what sort of control we would have as a local option district. The 172-page act only designates about a page and a half to how local jurisdictions can regulate cannabis establishments and criminalize marijuana, et cetera. And so it leaves the issue very vague and ambiguous, and everyone was waiting for some more guidance from the state, because essentially what the act says is we can enact quote-unquote reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. Again, not a whole lot of guidance. Then on June 15th, we received a letter from the state indicating that upon further research, they've decided they don't have the legal authority to enact any further regulations or restrictions applicable to municipalities. And so we're stuck with the act, and that sort of sent everyone into a panic, and all the municipalities around the state are doing exactly what we're doing, trying to get something adopted before September 1. September 1, you may have mentioned this, Mayor, is the date that the Cannabis Regulation Division begins accepting applications for retail establishments and for producers, et cetera. And so I don't know how long it will take to process those applications and then grant them, but I think the goal is to have this on the P&Z agenda at the next P&Z meeting, and then hopefully have something adopted before September 1st, just to be safe. And the reason that's important is because the act specifically says once a business is licensed by the state and operating, we can't impose any regulations that would restrict them or make them move, et cetera. So that's the reason for the joint study session tonight. I did send you earlier, I think 5 or 6 municipalities regulations on cannabis control. What are time, place, and manner restrictions? Well, we know we can regulate days of operation, hours of operation, distance between establishments, and then distance between establishments and schools, daycares, higher education institutions. that much we know we can do. I have summarized just in those three areas the different municipalities that I sent you their ordinances earlier. Something to keep in mind if you had a chance to read any of them before tonight's meeting is that in each one of those states, they are granted much more control than we have. They can control the licensing and have different restrictions on, what it takes to get licensed. They can, in most of those states, they can opt out completely. They don't have restrictions on how far they can designate as distances between a landmark and an establishment. And so their ordinances are probably going to be a lot lengthier and more inclusive than ours. But I think the main points that I wanted to get out in summary of some of those with regard to space and hours of operation, and I can go through them real quickly. Durango has a spacing of 250 feet between establishments, 1,000 feet between schools, rehabilitation centers, daycare facilities, and then 250 feet between parks. Hours of operation are 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week. Englewood, also in Colorado, seem to draft their ordinances off of Durango's. They also have 2,000 feet between, they have, instead of 1,000 feet, they have 2,000 feet between schools, rehabilitation centers, and daycares. They have 2,500 feet between establishments, and then a 100-foot requirement between any sort of residence and an establishment. Their hours are 8 to 8, 7 days a week. Prescott, Arizona, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., 7 days a week. They actually have an ordinance that my reading of it says they can only have one establishment in the entire city. It has to be 300 foot from a residence and 300 feet from school, church, or a park. Saginaw had hours of operation from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week. I wasn't able to find any distance requirements. Same thing with Bangor, Maine, no distance requirements. Hours of operation were 7 to 8. And then finally, Albuquerque. Albuquerque's ordinance hasn't quite yet been adopted and approved, and it's confusing if you went through the draft that I sent you because it references amendments, and then you have to refer back to the original IDO, which is the same thing as our UDO. But what I was able to glean from their ordinances is their distance requirement is 600 feet between establishments. 300 feet, obviously, is the maximum between schools, daycare facilities, and their hours of operation are 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. So some other areas that I think that we can probably regulate, and examples of these types of regulations exist in all the ordinances I sent you. Number one, I think we can require that all operations be in an enclosed building with no products visible outside. Number two, I think we can require that any odors or fumes be completely contained within the building and none of them escape from the building. Number three, I think we can require that there are certain security measures in place, an alarm system, a fire alarm, etc., a safe at the different establishments. Number four, while the Act specifically says we can't prohibit signs on the premises, I think we can prohibit signs off premises, so advertising or billboards that are not attached to the building or on the premises where the establishment is located. I think we can regulate those. I also saw a number of cities that prohibit possession on public property. It's not a criminal prohibition, so I don't think it's excluded by the Act. It's more like a administrative fine or violation, like a weed fine, and so I think that could be done. And then I don't know, I think this is probably unnecessary, but I know several of the ordinances contained clauses that say that you have to have a fixed location. It can't be some sort of a mobile business, but I believe the state statute already prohibits that, and it probably is redundant. But anyway, I know that's a lot to think about and go over, especially with the goal of getting something on the P&Z agenda by I guess it would be the 5th of July to make the Open Meetings Act requirement. But that's what we have, and so I've called the superintendent of RLD, which is the umbrella department over the Cannabis Control Division and over the state ABC that is in charge of administering this entire act, and she really couldn't give me much guidance or help other than to tell me to look outside of New Mexico, which we've done. I know that there's a sentiment among several other cities, Hobbs being one of them, that we can, because the act specifically doesn't say that we can't designate distance requirements between other landmarks in an establishment, i.e. a church or a public park or a playground, that they're gonna go ahead and do that. That the act doesn't say they can't do that, and they're gonna try. I know that the municipal league has sort of warned against that, but I know that there's at least 2 other municipalities that plan on imposing such requirements, so. I may have forgotten something. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have to the extent that I can. So, pass it back to you, Mayor.
Yep, appreciate that, Mr. Morris. Thank you for the explanation, and Commissioners, it is an awful lot of information to try to process, and so we appreciate all your effort, Mr. Morris, in the work that you've done, as well as in giving that explanation this evening. While it is a lot, we can kind of think of it as well, what is it that we can't even discuss, right? And and Mr. Morris just went through those things, and they certainly include days and hours of operation, density. We can think about what this would mean and how we would treat it from a zoning standpoint, and so forth. I got a question maybe before Commissioners no doubt have questions, but Mr. Morris, when we think about cannabis establishments, and I noticed this in reading through some of the other city ordinances that you provided, it looks like, correct me if I'm wrong, but we almost need to think about at least 3 different types of businesses, right? I mean, you'd have a retail or a cultivation operation, or perhaps a manufacturing operation. Do we need to think of it in 3 different types of businesses, or just treat it all as cannabis establishments?
We don't. That's a great question. Okay. So I think we can treat them all as cannabis establishments. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure, which of the 3 that we'll have. I assume that will probably be predominantly retail licenses in Clovis. But for purposes of the act, we can treat them all the same. And I know that's the way that other municipalities have seemed to do the same thing. And just to follow up, I should mention this. Of course, I didn't really get into the zoning aspects. We're definitely allowed to designate which zones they can and cannot operate in. And I believe other municipalities have done this, and I don't see why we couldn't, but, we don't just have to prohibit them in a certain zone. We could say, hey, in the CBD zone, they have to be 2,000 feet apart, but in a commercial general zone, it's 500 feet, or an industrial zone, it's 300 feet. So we can get creative in terms of how we manipulate our zoning distance requirements and prohibitions. So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, thanks for that. All good information. My question about the different types, I guess when I think about days and hours of operation, if we did have a cannabis manufacturing type business, we may not want to impose the same hours of operation and days and things like that. And so I don't know. That was just a thought that I had.
And we don't have to. I think that's the way most other cities have gone about it. We certainly don't have to.
All right. Appreciate that. City Commissioners, Planning and Zoning Commissioners, are there questions?
Just one, Mr. Morris, can we limit the number of licenses?
We can't. We can, similar to the way Prescott, Arizona did by just saying you can have 1 in the city. Yeah, the Act explicitly says we can't do that. And so we can limit the density of licenses, but not the number.
Okay.
Something I may mention too, adding on to that, is the city of Clovis has 2 ways in which a business can operate. They can either get a registration certificate, I believe it's called, or we require by ordinance certain types of businesses to get a license. Pawn shops, recycling businesses, I think, are a couple of them. So what we can do is require cannabis establishments to get a business license from us in Clovis, which allows us to assign a licensing fee that we can prescribe. And I don't know what the parameters of that would be. I don't know that anyone would know the answer to that, but it's something to think about if we want to require licenses.
Would that be set by the state?
So the way most municipalities do it is, first of all, you have to get a state license. Once you get your state license, then you have to apply to the city for a city license, pay the fee, and then the city grants it. Now in Colorado, where they're given the authority to impose all sorts of licensing restrictions, different cities may say, I want you to show me your floor plan, I want to see your security measures, I want to have a list of all your employees. We can't do that. We can simply charge a fee and issue it. So.
Thank you.
Good question. Yes, Mr. North.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Morris, is there a set fee, like limit on that fee? Or is that already in the code?
There's not, I think the highest fee we have currently in the code is $650 for a pawn shop. So there is no set limit, and I don't know what the parameters are.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you for that. Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Paula?
Mr. Morris, if I may, I read quickly through some of the attachments that you sent, and some of the things that other cities cited. I just want to go through real quick and see if we're even allowed to regulate this before we bother discussing it. A lot of other cities were able to distance them from churches. Are we able to do that?
So that, I mentioned earlier, I'd spoken to the city attorney at Hobbs. I believe it's their intention to do that.
Okay.
I think there's conflicting views, and that's why this legislation is so problematic, because it really hangs us all out to dry.
not spelled
We
out,
have no
yeah.
idea, but I know that their sentiment is, the legislation was poorly drafted and rushed into, and I think they are willing to take that risk. And so they plan to do that with playgrounds, parks, rehabilitation centers, and with churches, as I
Okay,
understand.
that was some of my other questions, rehab facilities and all city parks or just city parks with playgrounds? I've kind of seen both.
I'm not sure. I noticed most of or at least Englewood and Durango only prescribe distances between parks that have playground equipment. So I'm not sure how Hobbs will approach it.
Okay. What about distance? We can zone it a distance from resident, a home,
We can.
correct? Okay. What about sales on Sunday? Does it have to be 7 days a week?
No, does not.
Okay. What about, I noticed in some of the other cities, they regulate the disposal of the product. Like if I guess some of it's ruined, they're not allowed to throw it in the dumpster behind the building.
So that's a good question. I didn't add that to my list, but I did see that, and I think that we probably could do that. Several of them had protections to make sure that children or animals or
People.
whatever people didn't access it. So
Okay.
that's a great question, and I should have added that to my list. I think we can regulate that.
Okay, and then what about inspection of the records of the business? I noticed that there are some cities where the city manager can actually go in and inspect the books of the business. Is that allowed?
So I think we can follow our normal licensing ordinances, and I don't exactly know what those are, what we're allowed to do, but I don't think we can go beyond that.
Okay. And then I noticed that you can, and this is actually in this Cannabis Regulation Act, that cities can allow, if I'm reading this right, for cannabis consumption areas.
Correct.
If we don't want consumption areas, do we have to spell that out?
No, another great question. We don't have to do anything. If we don't want consumption areas, we simply don't have to act. If we do want them, we have to affirmatively act, pass an ordinance.
So that would mean if we say nothing, then somebody can't open up a place and say, smoke away?
Correct.
It's allowed here?
Correct.
Okay. That's all.
Great questions, Commissioner Paula. Thank you for that.
So we can regulate consumption on site also?
So you can't consume it in public, and you can't consume it in a cannabis consumption area, so a private place where people can consume it, unless we adopt an ordinance that says we can.
Okay, so buy it, take it home, and do whatever you want with it.
Right.
Pretty much.
And I believe now you still can't possess more than 2 ounces of marijuana outside your home, and I think inside your home you can possess as much as you want.
Okay.
Mr. Howell?
No, Mayor, I just see that Mr. Smith has raised his hand on the
okay.
Google Meet, so give him an opportunity to recognize the floor.
Thanks for drawing our attention to that. Commissioner from Planning and Zoning, Commissioner Smith?
Hello, Mayor, thank you. I just have a couple of questions. I want to make sure that I'm clear on a couple of things. I want to, stay welcoming to these businesses, but I want to talk about how we set hard regulations first. Did you say at one point that we can make it where it's 500 feet away from any business or residence?
So the act says that we can create a distance requirement between an establishment and a school or daycare of no more than 300 feet. It's silent beyond that. We can, if you're talking about distances between establishments, there are no parameters. We can come up with whatever we believe is quote-unquote reasonable. Does that answer
Okay,
your
but
question?
outside of churches or anything like, outside of churches or schools
So-
or rehabilitation center, there's no other regulation. Like, we can't say you can't be within 300 feet of any business at all.
So,
Does that
again,
make sense?
right, and I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know that anybody does. The one viewpoint is that because the act specifically says you can designate a distance between a school and an establishment of no more than 300 feet, some cities and the municipal league have taken the position that that implies that you can't make a distance requirement between any other landmark, a church, a military installation, whatever. Some cities have taken the position that they don't read it that way, and the act didn't explicitly say they can't do that, so they're gonna go ahead and do it. So it would be up to the commission and ultimately the city commission, and unfortunately, I don't have an answer to that.
Okay. And then the questions of CBD zones, can you just designate one area of the city or wherever where this can be sold and they can't operate anywhere else?
We could create a new zoning district, if that's what you're asking, or we could designate them all in one zone. Yes, we certainly can do both of those.
Commissioner Smith,
Okay.
if by CBD, if you've heard that acronym used this evening, we were probably talking about the Central Business District.
Okay, okay.
Another action.
Well, I was just saying like a zone though too, where you just create a zone for this, and that was kind of answering my question that you were talking about. Is if we created a zone specifically for just this business, is that something that's been discussed?
That is something that we can do. I know that's something that other cities are looking at.
Okay, I just want to know if that was been brought up. Okay, thank you.
Good questions, thank you.
Do we have an area where we can do that?
And Mayor Pro Tem, and Commissioners, and the way I would potentially envision something like that being created would be an overlay district. And so, for example, we have livestock overlay districts, single family, and then there's different overlay districts within single family. Carports can have overlay districts. And so that's how I would potentially see an overlay district being created for this, if that was a direction you guys would like to move in.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Howalt, I appreciate it. Commissioner, did you have another question earlier?
No, I was just trying to let you know that Mark was
Oh,
raising
thanks.
his hand.
Everyone was trying to alert me that someone online needed to speak. Thanks, appreciate that. Other questions or comments?
Mayor, I have a comment. Can you hear
Yes.
me okay?
Yes, we can.
So as Mr. Morris was going through those different proposed ordinances from municipalities around the state, what occurred to me was it kind of sounded like packaged liquor sales to me. And could we look at that ordinance pretty closely and perhaps mirror a lot of those instead of reinventing the wheel?
Yeah, that's a good thought. Thank you for that, Commissioner Moore.
One of those particularly is no alcohol sales on the day of voting or before the polls close, so that may be something to consider.
Great point. Thank you for sharing that, sir. Others? Mr. Howalt.
Mayor Pro Tem, and Commissioners, and one way to potentially attack this is for us to break this down. And so, let's think about, what days and try to address that first, and then maybe hours and address that. And then let's talk about zones and address that. And then talk about those distances. So rather than trying to think of it under this big broad umbrella, let's start breaking them down, and then we can have discussion regarding around each one of those points. And so that way we can get a consensus, and so we can start drafting those ordinances to ultimately then present to the Planning and Zoning Commission and then to the commission as a whole.
Narrow the focus of our discussion.
Absolutely.
That's what I heard you say. Thank you. Commissioner, actually Chairman of P&Z, Mr. North.
Thank you, Mayor. So in that light, Mr. Howalt, are you saying let's go ahead and tackle that now? I would say
Whenever you're ready.
a great way to start that discussion. I think let's just go ahead and put some of the elephants in the room out there. I believe the days of sales are going to be a big one. I say let's start with that one and open it up for that. And again, Mr. Morris, the municipality has the ability to control the days and times of the sale, correct? The state statute says we have that ability to do that.
Correct.
We can either restrict the business that's trying to bring GRT into our city, or we can open it up, right? Correct? I mean, we have that ability as the city commissioners will ultimately vote on this.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the only guidance we have is that it has to be reasonable. And again, when I expressed my concerns to the superintendent of the division and told her, look, what if reasonable to our commission is every other Tuesday for 30 minutes? She sort of laughed and said, I guess you'll have to figure it out. So we are sort of all stubbing our toes in the dark and trying to figure it out. I wish I could offer some more concrete guidance.
Well, and again, I think this goes to referencing, I can't remember who it was that brought up the liquor laws, and the liquor sales and the package sales. That is a point of contention still to this day in within our state municipality is liquor sales on Sunday. There's a number of people that believe, yeah, we should do that. And there's quite a few people that believe, let's go ahead and sell it 7 days a week. Just to put my opinion out there, not that, but just to open it up for conversation, I say the less restriction, the better, again, for the business and the GRT. And 7 days a week sales, I don't see the difference of selling it 7 days a week to 6. So again, I'll open it up for conversation. I'm sure this is going to be a good one. So let's fire it up.
Chairman North, I like your style. Let's fire it up, and you've got to start fire it up, and you've got to start it down the path of talking about days and hours of operation. So let's do that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Now, there was another law passed related to liquor laws, I believe. Did that change? What I wanted to ask is, what are the days and hours of operation of a liquor store in Clovis with the new law?
Well, beginning tomorrow, I believe they'll be allowed, Sunday sales will be allowed from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. at restaurants, and then I think 12 a.m. at other establishments or stores.
Okay, because when we talk about days and hours of operation, like Commissioner Moore brought up, I think that, packaged liquor sales is probably a good model to look at, and so, if we were to say, hey, if those days and hours work for liquor, why not for legalized recreational marijuana? We would be, to your point, we would be down the road of Sunday sales. They would be open on Sunday. But thoughts on that?
I think it's one of those deals where a lot of people have been pushing for that, to have 7 days a week, the ability to purchase alcohol. Times are changing, I think, and this proves what I'm just saying, that times are changing. The state is allowing this to happen. So let's try to do the best that we can to minimize the effects of whatever they're selling, whether alcohol or marijuana. So I'm okay with the 7 days a week. I will be more concerned with the hours of operation.
So you would be interested in talking about restricting the hours to less than that of alcohol and liquor?
Yeah, not so much the days of operation.
Okay, thanks for that, Commissioner, appreciate it. For discussion purposes, is there anyone that feels strongly against the idea of mirroring the packaged liquor sales days and hours of operation?
Mayor,
Yes,
I
Commissioner.
agree with Commissioner North and Commissioner Garza. I have been approached several times about having to go to Friona Bovina to buy their liquor on Sundays. Why do we not sell? They say that there is a stream of cars that go out of town to buy their liquor on Sundays. So I agree with 7 days. I don't see a problem, but yes, limiting the hours.
Okay. When you say limiting the hours, Commissioners, either one of you, do you mean a limit?
Well,
from-
maybe 10 to 5 or something. I just don't see why they need to buy marijuana at 10 o'clock at night. I don't know, I'm not a smoker. I don't know.
Mayor, if I may, what I gleaned from looking at other cities is I think there was some concern about limiting the hours, so there's less impaired driving later in the evening and while it's dark, I think is some of the debate that went on in other cities.
Mayor Morris,
Sir,
may I ask a question?
yes.
Do we have a traffic study that shows peak hours within the city under the major arterials?
It's going to vary from road to road.
It will, but
In
is there an
day-to-day.
average between them all?
I-
Where it would seem like peak hours are typically at 5 or at noon?
Absolutely, in general. I
Okay,
mean, your
yeah.
commuting times are going to be your peak hours. So, in Monday through Friday.
So I think the time restrictions, like Commissioner Cassell said, is a good approach. As far as nightlife, like if we want to restrict it to like maybe 9 p.m., 8 p.m. before peak traffic for like Dragon Main or something like that on a weekend, can we do that where we restrict the time on the weekend instead?
We can.
Okay.
Interesting thought. Thank you, Commissioner Sol. This doesn't fit in days and hours of operation, so sorry, this isn't narrow, but it's a thought that I just had. Is delivery allowed?
Delivery is not allowed.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. All right, back to days and hours of operation. Any other thoughts?
Mayor, I have a thought.
Yes,
Would
Commissioner.
it be okay to ask, I hate to put him on the spot, but Chief Ford, his thoughts on hours of operation?
I think it's okay to put Chief Ford on the spot. Chief Ford? Thank you for
Sure,
being
you
here,
have a
sir.
few thoughts on this.
Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, I appreciate everybody allowing me to speak. This is definitely a very interesting topic. Been on the phone with Mr. Morris twice today, I think, along with fellow chiefs and lawyers from the area that I've worked with on trying to figure out how we deal with this and the issues it is. And it is a very, very tough subject because they've left too many unanswered parameters in dealing with this. And it is going to be a problem for all of us trying to figure it out and then to cope with the issues. I have lots of my partners in this business from Colorado area that I've known for years, that when they did implement this, all the initial problems that it caused and that they had in trying to deal with it and cope with it. And that's going to be some of the same problems we are going to deal with also. One of the biggest ones and our concerns on my end of the world is the impairment part, because they did leave that so open and put nothing in there to even help us and direct us in dealing with it and taking care of our citizens and taking care of the motoring public, because it is still a product that impairs a driver's proper faculties to operate a vehicle and puts more on the road that could cause more issues and injuries and unfortunately fatalities if not dealt with properly. So there's definitely a lot of issues that we're going to have to address and look at. One of the
Do you
things
have a preference on when sales should stop?
Well, again, that'll be up to y'all. I think, personally, I think it needs to be, again, following some of the parameters with probably the alcohol. But I don't know. That's a tough one to answer at this point.
Okay,
It really is.
thank you.
Any other law enforcement related questions while we have Chief Ford at the podium?
You know, I did have a question on the impairment, but I think you answered that, and I think that's going to be a difficult situation and answer.
It is. It's going to be very difficult. Definitely.
Mayor.
Yes, sir. Mr.
Chief,
North.
Yes, sir.
thank you for your service and everything you do for our community. How long have you been in law enforcement, sir?
Almost 3 decades.
So not very long. You've seen a few traffic stops over the years.
Yes,
And if I remember correctly, you were a K-9?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In your obviously very professional experience and years of training, would you say there's just a drastic, I don't know how to really state this, but between DWIs as far as alcohol consumption compared to marijuana, in your experience of pulling people over and I'm not trying to say that one's worse than the other because they're both under impairment. It's not a good idea. But I guess what I'm saying is do you see a drastic increase of, or is there more people out there smoking weed and marijuana and driving compared to drinking under the influence of alcohol?
What I will tell you, Commissioner, is when all this started, and most of y'all know several years ago, when we started dealing with this in the legislature, I leaned very, very heavily on my partners up north because they, of course, had already dealt with this problem. We have to keep in mind marijuana will stay in your system longer. It will keep you impaired longer. So that is definitely an issue that concerns us and concerns us with the safety of the public and the safety of our citizens. So I know they dealt with so much of it in talking with the chiefs and the sheriffs that I know up there. You have to understand in Colorado, they actually did a much better job of putting the law in place. And the other problem they deal with now is they have two different drug task forces. They have one that deals with all the illegal narcotics, and they have one that specifically deals with the marijuana issue and all of the issues that go along with it. And so it put a lot of strain on law enforcement and them trying to deal with all the issues. But I would say, yes, we have greater concern for the marijuana because of the amount of impairment. As we all know, the marijuana that is being distributed and grown now is a very high-grade hybrid product that the THC is much higher than us old guys, and I'm one of those, that what we saw, I never used it or heard about when we grew up. So it's definitely a much higher product. So it's going to cause a longer amount of impairment and possibly a higher impairment. So that is a great concern of ours in trying to keep the public safe.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes. Anybody else? Thank you. Appreciate you, Mayor.
All right, in terms of days and hours of operation, I think it's safe to say that we would consider mirroring what packaged liquor sales is allowed to do, but we would like to discuss limiting those hours of operation. That's what I've heard from several of you. Okay, all right. What would we like to tackle next? How about some of the distance discussion? It sounds like the state law gives us at least 300 feet from a school, right? Does that include daycares and?
Higher education, daycares, preschools, yep, all included.
Okay, and it's a maximum of 300 feet?
Maximum of 300 feet.
Right.
Which I assume will exercise the maximum.
Right,
I would think.
right.
And Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, if Stephen Hewitt, if you could pull up our zoning map,
Okay.
that will give us a visual reference, and maybe when y'all see the zones, and maybe consider which zones you would allow it in, which then would maybe help assist with those distances. So you can put a visual eye on where first you may allow it from a zoning standpoint, and then be able to help you with those distances first.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for having that ready for us this evening, Mr. Howalt.
And I can't read that, so.
You may need to walk over to the big screen if you like, and get a feel.
And so the area to the south of the community, that dark brown area, is where the cursor is that's an industrial zone. And then the yellow areas are commercial general zones. And then the area in the center of the community is the central business district. And then the other colors are basically your residential single family with your different overlay districts within them. So from consideration would be, do you want to limit it to commercial general? Do you want to limit it to industrial zones? Do you want to exclude the central business district? Do you want to include the central business district? And then from that perspective, obviously, I would assume that you guys would want to have the 300-foot rule for the churches and schools. I'm sorry, for the schools and the daycares. Thank you. And so, assuming we're going there, and then from the rest of the distances based off the zones. So we may want to tackle the zoning issue first.
Okay. Thoughts about zoning then? We'll come back to talking about distances. You said earlier in answering a question that we potentially could look at an overlay, essentially creating a special district. Is
Correct.
that right?
Yep.
Okay. So there's that option to think about and discuss, and then there's simply looking at our zones now and saying, for example, that, well, yes, we would allow it in commercial general and industrial, for example, but exclude it from the central business district. Thoughts about zoning?
And Mayor,
Oh,
this,
yeah.
probably should have mentioned this earlier, but it's a good time now to, the best help I can give the commission is that to survive a lawsuit, we have to have some sort of rationale. You know, some basis behind our decision that's not just, we don't like marijuana. And so, when we were in our smaller group discussions, I mentioned, you know, if we were to prohibit it in our CG zone, our commercial general zone, I think that would likely draw a lawsuit that we probably wouldn't survive. I wouldn't see any rationale that could survive when we allow adult entertainment and liquor stores and everything else in CG and not to allow marijuana. And so, again, just food for thought. I think there could be a great rationale to prohibit it or limit it in the central business district because of traffic and pedestrians. We already have restrictions on adult entertainment and other things there. But anyway, just food for thought when the commission is debating that we have to have some sort of rationale behind each decision.
Yep, yep. We would, we appreciate that advice, thank you. I would be in favor for actually a couple of the reasons that Mr. Morris just stated in excluding it from central business district. And I think that because of the comments that he made about commercial general and the fact that that's probably where it belongs, I think I'd be in favor of saying, you know, it would be allowed in commercial general, subject to other maybe distance restrictions we might try to impose. Thoughts?
I can agree with that. I definitely don't think it belongs in the central business district, but as far as commercial, I would, yeah, I think that would be acceptable.
Appreciate that, Mayor Pro Tem.
Well, Mayor, it's not like they're going to smoke it right there, right? I mean, they're going to purchase it, take it wherever, or?
You know, this is all really new to me, but yeah, I think the answer to that is,
I mean, I don't think we
Right.
should exclude the central district area.
And it will be illegal to smoke it anywhere in
That's-
public.
yeah.
And so, I don't know that will necessarily happen. There may be some people that still do it, but it will be illegal.
The issue with that, is people gonna be walking down the street smoking it because they don't care because it's legal. And
Well, then we
who's-
call Chief
who's-
Ford.
Who's gonna control that? And I think we will be putting more pressure on our police force to be there just to control it.
yeah, thanks for that, Commissioner Garza. And Commissioner Casals, then, are you saying that you would be in favor of it being in our downtown central business
I don't think it
district?
makes a difference where it's going to be sold.
Okay,
Mayor Morris?
okay.
And
Yes.
the reason I bring that up is because I hear stories about Colorado doing that. They have that issue, so that's the only reason I bring it up.
Yeah, I
We're
appreciate
smarter
that.
than Colorado.
Commissioner Sol?
Well, my last visit to Denver, there was nothing up in smoke. So, but when it comes to the use, you know, it's just as illegal as trying to drink a beer while walking around in the downtown area. So I feel like if it's already illegal, then why do that there? And I'm also concerned about, I don't know if people already have property and have the intent of doing that in a certain area, but I get concerned would that count as a taking if we were to try to restrict marijuana in a particular place where they already have an economic plan and the intent to distribute?
I think the September 1st date is what's key. They can't submit their applications until September 1st. I mean, I guess they could have a plan with a certain property, but they have no legal, reason for putting that plan together yet because they haven't put their application in and we haven't done any zoning.
And on top of that, Commissioner Sol, we've informed each person who's called, and there've been a number of people who have called, that exactly that, that until we adopt our zoning ordinances and regulations, we don't know if you're gonna have to move or not, and buy property at your own risk, and so
Okay.
everyone
So you've
that's
already
approached the
disclaimed
city
it.
has been informed of that.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that was to the business owner so that we don't seem, but it brought up some Supreme Court cases in my mind from the planning and zoning, from the APA organization, and I just wanted to avoid, like you said, a lawsuit that would put us in the losing position. But back to Helen Casaus's, Commissioner Helen Casaus's comment, I would concur with her.
Okay, thank you
Mayor.
for that. Yes.
Go ahead,
No, go
Commissioner
ahead.
Paul. Just want a couple clarification, Mr. Morris. So there is no consumption allowed, and not just on public spaces, but even within an establishment that is a licensed establishment, dispensary, whatever, you cannot consume there, correct?
Correct, unless we later on adopted an ordinance allowing for cannabis consumption areas.
Okay, similar to like the brewery.
Correct.
Okay, and then secondly, I believe we also are going to tackle the Clean Air Act and the odor, I guess is what they call it, the Odor Act, correct?
Right, I think there's probably 5 or 6 items of low-hanging fruit that we can all agree on that need to be included.
Okay, so
That's
back,
one of them.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Back to the point of the commissioners, I guess I would raise the question and just want to hear the pros and cons and the negatives or the positives, I guess, of if you can't consume it there in the Central Business District, the CBD, which is ironic that it's, what would be the negatives to having an establishment there? Again, we're gonna do zoning as far as how many they can be down there, how far apart they have to be, the signage. We're gonna look at all that, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and so, again, I just would like to hear, I guess, some of the arguments against allowing people to sell within the CBD, and the pros of saying we're gonna restrict, which is a really fantastic trigger word of restricting business. So if we can go into that, that would be great. Again, just trying to fire it up, Mayor.
It's great, Chairman North. Commissioner Paul?
Well, thank you, Commissioner North. Those kind of were my exact same questions. I'm not sold on the idea of having it in the commercial business district, but why not? I want to know why. I just want to hear the arguments, because part of me thinks, well, wouldn't it be nicer to not have a dilapidated building downtown and to have somebody come in and refurbish a building and make it look nice? But then I also don't want one, I mean, we already have parking problems on Main Street, so we don't want to have one on every block. I don't know. I just kind of want to hear the argument, both directions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Mayor, parking problems are a good thing. And I guess, again, I'll bring up the point. So I'm assuming, to reference, it's CG?
CG is
Commercial general.
Commercial general. So I'm assuming that would be like, if I go up to Big Five Sporting Goods on North Prince, that's commercial general. So really, if I'm taking my kids in to get sporting goods or whatever, and right next to it is a dispensary, I guess it's just difficult for me to see the difference between CBD, CG. I mean, really, what are we saving? What are the pros and the cons there?
Commissioner North, if I may just offer something for you. When I was going through all these different ordinances, it occurred to me that the rationale, other cities have done the same thing, prohibited it in their downtown areas. And the only rationale that I read from the various ordinances was that basically the high traffic, high pedestrian areas and impaired driving were their concerns. And so that was written in a few of the other ordinances. I don't know what the other concerns of our commission are, but I know that in cities where they prohibited downtown, that was the only thing that I really saw as to why they did that.
Okay. No, perfect. Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great reason. Mr. Morris, you also mentioned, what was the other type of business that we've said isn't allowed in?
Adult entertainment currently is not allowed in CBD.
Okay, all right. So we've, over time, we have excluded some things from the Central Business District. So, okay. Any other thoughts, what Commissioner Paula and Chairman North have asked for pros and cons for excluding it or not excluding it in the central business district? What are your thoughts?
On the central business district, we already have a few churches there, so if we're gonna restrict the distance between that and the business, then right there, you have an excuse to limit that.
You know, I'm not so worried so much about the impaired driving as I am just kind of what Commissioner Garza mentioned, the churches. But the amount of traffic that's downtown and the amount of walking traffic that is downtown at this time. And evidently gonna grow. It's gonna get better. And so it's gonna increase. And so that's the only thing I'm concerned about. But I do understand your point, Mr. North, as to, and, you know, where we're going with that, so.
Well, and I guess I would go back to the impairment situation and the fact that they're not allowed to consume there. So they shouldn't technically be impaired when they leave the premises and drive. And again, I'm not trying to go I don't know, I'm just trying to open up the discussion and really make sure we look at all avenues of the business person and the whole situation, just so that we're not, I just want to avoid any tunnel vision.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the debate and all sides of it. Something that I've, up until now, and including now, I've viewed as a potential, downside or a negative is just in the central business district, the proximity to residential. We have, just a street over, you have a residential area, and I think if we were to get into the distance discussion, I think a lot of us would be in favor of a distance from residential, and a distance from residences. And in the downtown, just, a street, and forgive me, I don't know where the lines are drawn exactly on our central business district, but hey, look at that. So one of those is Maine, and no doubt we go east or west, and we get into, you get into residences going either direction pretty quickly there. And then you have, I know, a Pyle Street, you have mixed development, so you have the ability to put a business in, but it could be next door to a personal residence. And I'm not sure that that's the best thing to do to our residents of the downtown area.
And Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, I mean, when we think about smoking, it's also illegal, I think, to smoke within 25 feet of a store entrance. But yet it still happens all the time.
Right.
And so, and the other consideration is that we're not talking about just smoking as well, you're also talking about edibles. And so, something else to think about as y'all are thinking about many things.
Mr. Howell, we were trying to focus on one issue at a time, I believe.
Was his idea, right?
So, other pros and cons. Yes?
So many of the individuals or the businesses that are on Main Street right now had to, that sell beer and liquor, they had to receive variances for that, correct?
Correct.
So because of their proximity to a church, there's several downtown. So would the dispensaries also have to receive a variance for a situation like this? If they're allowed in the downtown district?
So the alcohol variance comes from state statute, and the state statute says you can get an alcohol variance, but you have to go to the local option district to the city to ask for it. And so they've all done that, and I believe the ones that have passed, we've all passed resolutions waiving that distance requirement. If we were, again, there's some question about whether or not we can impose a distance requirement between an establishment and a church. If we decide to go that route, then no, there won't be a waiver provision. Either we make a distance requirement or we don't. There's no state statute that says it can be waived at a later time, so.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Morrison. Appreciate that. Yes,
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner Klein.
maybe
Yes, sir.
we should discuss the distance requirements, because that'll kind of decide what we're just talking about here.
Yeah, good.
I mean, that's kind of a big one.
Yep, good idea. Good idea. Unless there are any last thoughts about zoning, let's move on to distance. So I think we would, I would certainly be in favor and would argue that we should do the maximum allowable distance from schools, daycares, all of those types of things, and the state law gives us the ability to do a maximum of 300 feet from schools, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so I think, we could all agree on that. Distance from parks and playgrounds, I think there's an argument or a case to be made for, maybe we try and do something there. Certainly distance from churches, I think that we should have that discussion. I would be in favor of a distance from churches. Anyone else on distance?
What about residential?
Yeah, yes, and in my discussion about the central business district, I mentioned that I think we should have a distance from residential.
Is
Certainly.
300 feet the maximum?
It doesn't give us, 300 feet is given in the state law related to schools, but it's silent on these other things, so we would be testing the waters,
We
right?
would be testing the waters, and so whatever we introduce and adopt, I'll add a severability clause to that, which says, in the event that we get sued and something violates state statute, only that portion that violates state statute is removed. So it'll protect us and won't undo everything that we've done in terms of zoning or other distance requirements, et cetera, if we want to go out on a limb on some of these other areas.
Yep, appreciate that.
And in regards to residences, are we talking about residential zones or a residence? Because within commercial general, you can also have a residence. And so, it's mixed use. And so, we want to be specific in residential zones versus a residence. Because honestly, in a commercial general, a house could be a business and then later change back to being a place of living.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make. I guess if you have a home in a commercial general, perhaps you're running the risk that a business that you don't necessarily enjoy being your neighbor could be your neighbor, and that could happen, I guess. But I think that we need to think about a distance from residences and not just a residential zone, if we can. I think of, for example, the old Rain Tree Grocery property and the property out in front of that on Norris. The folks right across the alley in the Rain Tree subdivision might appreciate us as the city saying, not in the residential zone, but however, it's happening right behind their home, right? So I think that, a distance from personal residences is something we should consider, and or a distance from any residential zone that would protect our citizens' ownership of their homes, or enjoyment of their property. Thoughts on that?
Mayor Morris?
Yes, Commissioner Sol.
I have a question of whether or not, because it sounds like you really want to consider the rights of a person to petition against or for, if they're going to be the neighbor. Like when we do zoning changes, can we notify those around and they have the ability to come and petition if they want to, as part of our zoning thing when it comes to licensing a cannabis industry?
So is your question, when someone applies for a license with us, can we require them to go to P&Z and open it up to the public?
Pretty much, and within the zone, and notify the public within a certain, range of that business, so that they have the opportunity to voice their opinion
Right.
within that neighborhood,
And I think that's how Bangor, Maine goes about it. They don't have a distance requirement. Every application has to go through their P&Z. But the answer is no. Under the state statute, we cannot go beyond just our normal business license. We can't impose any other restrictions or conditions. And I would add too, if you saw the draft from Albuquerque's ordinances, there were two different amendments proposed to regulate distance between residential zones, and then one to regulate distance between religious institutions and establishments, and both failed and did not make it to their final draft, so.
Thoughts on distance?
Mr. Morris, how far legally, can we keep it away from a residential zone?
It's impossible to say, so.
I mean, I've seen everything from 300 feet to 2,500 feet in what I've read.
2,500 is the most I've seen. I think that was Englewood, Colorado. So
Do you feel like that would be pushing the envelope?
I feel like the further the distance is, the more likely it is it'll be challenged by somebody.
Mr. Mayor?
Sir?
So absolutely, right? The further and the more we restrict, the more we're going to open ourselves up for litigation, most likely.
What I
It's
think-
speculation, obviously, but
What I think will probably happen is that some municipality will do something more restrictive than we do. They'll get, they may have a 10,000 feet from a church requirement. They get sued, and then a decision will
nowhere
come
in town,
down, and then we know, we didn't get sued, but we know we have to change our ordinance, if that makes sense.
And again, speculation here. I would lean more towards a zone instead of the actual residence. But also, I would also speculate that the market will drive predominantly where these businesses will locate. In my personal opinion, you're gonna put it in the best spot for your business, and that might not be necessarily in certain parts of town next to certain houses in certain neighborhoods. And again, I'm totally speculating here because I really have zero experience with cannabis at all. So, but I would just keep that in mind when we're making these, again, restrictions and regulations, thinking about the business owner, and again, protecting the citizens. So it is a fine line we're going to walk, but just lean more towards the fine line, the regulation towards the actual zone.
And something I'd like to add, if I didn't already, Mayor, is, as far as I can tell, the worst-case scenario from getting sued and losing a lawsuit would simply be, again, worst-case scenario, we lose attorney's fees on both sides. There's not gonna be some kind of big judgment against us or admonishment or anything like that, especially with as vague and ambiguous as this act is. So, again, I think Hobbs' position, and they may be out on their own on this, is a little bit cavalier and saying, worst-case scenario, we have to go back and change our ordinance later, so.
Yep, appreciate that. Thanks. Any other thoughts on distance? Okay, we kind of talked about residential and agree that there may be some consideration for a distance from residential. Is that fair? Okay. What about distance from parks, playgrounds, those kinds of things?
Yes.
Churches, I mean,
And
do we want to add churches to it? Right.
okay.
We-
Yeah, the more
Looking for
active
some feedback.
participation we get in nodding and saying, yes, Mayor, the quicker we'll move on to the next subject. Okay. Yeah.
So, did we decide to have a distance from a residential district?
Yes.
We didn't talk about a specific distance, but
That-
we agreed that,
We think that would be a good idea? And as we, I'll point to the map again, as you see there, most of that area is residential. I mean, the yellow is commercial general and the purple is central business district, and then everything else is residential. And so when you think about that distance, think about if you go 1,000 feet from a residential area, you're gonna wipe out a lot of area.
And I think there's two ways to approach it, or you can use one or the other or both. You can prescribe a distance between a residence, which would apply, in the CBD or in the commercial general or at the borderline of a residential district and a commercial district. Or you can prescribe a distance between a residential district and an establishment, or both.
Commissioner Morrison.
I personally think that it should probably be however many feet is designated from a residential district, not necessarily from a residence. Because I could go throw my bed in, a building that I own on Main Street and it's a residence. Who's to say that it's not?
One thing to point out too is your once your license is approved and everything is in the clear, if somebody buys a house, you're in commercial general and somebody buys a house 100 feet from you and we have a 300-foot requirement, you're under the act, we can't make you move, you're grandfathered in, so. Or even if a daycare moves in, or a church, or whatever, you're still allowed to operate.
Okay, thank you for that, Commissioner Morrison. Commissioner Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. So for clarification, we talk about 300 feet, that's approximately one city block, correct?
Approximately.
So in your mind,
Or
you can
less.
visualize that anyway. Another is, are we going to be able to, Mr. Morris, or one of our tasks will be determining how many license, is that correct?
No,
No,
we have to determine what we're gonna charge as a licensing fee,
okay.
and,
But we can determine how many establishments are within a certain proximity of each other, correct?
Correct.
And eventually we'll go down the bullet points, Mr. Howald, and get to that.
Eventually, we can talk about density of licenses.
Right, and so
but-
effectively, if you said you can only have one dispensary every 5,000 feet, you've eliminating the licenses effectively.
Right.
Right.
I just wonder in my mind how many, and when we don't know this, but how many of these will be sustainable in, in, with our, given our population, but 5, 10, I don't know.
Commissioner Moore, I think the idea that this is going to happen is going to bring some people from Texas. So it doesn't matter how many.
I agree.
Yeah, that's the traffic we're expecting from both sides, Amarillo and Lubbock. And I think that's what they're banking on, and not just necessarily the people here in Clovis.
Okay. Thank you for that. So, Planning and Zoning Commission, City Commissioners, how about this? Distance from churches, residential zone, parks, playgrounds. What's the other thing that we mentioned? How about this for discussion purposes, 1,000 feet?
I'll be okay with that, with the parks, since most parks are city-owned.
1,000 feet, that's 3 city blocks, right?
A little
Or
over
more?
Give and take, yeah.
Somebody
But we're
had to
not
say a
allowed to do
number.
that far from schools, correct? It's only 300?
Correct.
correct.
So you're talking about just from one business to the next?
No.
No, he's
I-
talking.
He's referring
No,
to
I'm saying-
the district.
Oh, parks
Yeah.
and,
Yeah, I'm saying 1,000 feet from a church, 1,000 feet from a park or a playground.
I'm fine with 1,000 feet, but Mr. Morris, did you say earlier that if we set the distance at 1,000 feet, that they cannot come back and reapply for a variance?
If we set the distance at 1,000 feet, and correct, once we adopt that ordinance, that can't be changed, there's no variance that can be adopted. That's correct.
So it's set that.
Now, if there were two of them that were already there within 1,000 feet of each other before we adopted our
Right.
ordinance, then we can't make them move.
Okay.
And the reality, you can make text amendments to your UDO. We do it. And so if at a later time y'all chose to change that distance, you certainly could. That's still in your purview to do that.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Mayor?
Yep.
I would
Commissioner
pose,
North.
if I can pose the question as to kind of the logic behind the 1,000 feet for those establishments, just to kind of give me a little bit better understanding of that distance, because I have a different distance in mind, but just out of curiosity.
I'd love to hear your distance. My distance is 1,000 feet was a starting place, and it's based upon my desire to look out for property rights, look out for health, welfare, and safety of the citizens of Clovis, and
Of people purchasing something that they're going to go home and use. Not using there on the premises.
yep. Love to hear your suggestion.
And I would probably lean more towards the 500 foot.
Okay.
That would be the number in my head, but
Okay,
again.
and
like-
why,
like-
and why 500 feet? Why would you
It's
land on
less
500
restrictive
feet?
to the business owner. And
It's
to
more
Ms. Casaus's
restrictive than
point-
what the
to
state
Mrs.
said about
To Ms.
schools.
Casaus's point, you know, 3 city blocks, when you look at some of our areas, I mean, that knocks out a lot of area where you can put a business. So, again, I'm just trying to be less restrictive to the business owner on somebody who's trying to sell a product that is not gonna be utilized there, but it's gonna be utilized at home.
I agree with Commissioner North. I think 1,000 feet is too much.
So do you also agree with him that 500 is the magic number?
I would say 300 to 500.
3 to 500, okay.
I don't know about magic, but, I mean, if you wanna use that word, that's fine.
Anyone else?
What is the rule presently on the packaged liquor sales as far as distance from a school, church, et cetera?
300 feet.
There is no rule regarding distance from a packaged liquor, and I want to say in a residential zone. That you just have to be in a certain zone. But it's not, you have to be in commercial, general, or business use zones, but there's no distance requirement between the business and a residential zone for
Thank
packaged
you.
liquor.
Oh, I thought he was asking about churches and schools.
Well, in churches is 3, so both.
And I think the state was just looking at the alcohol regulations also, and that's what they have this in place.
So you'd lean more towards 300 feet?
I will, from parks, I'll be happy with 500.
Maybe it is magic.
Okay.
I personally think 300 feet is probably, I mean, it's good for liquor. This is the same type of situation, and we would just keep it 300 feet across the board for everything. And that would probably take us out of the running for a lawsuit.
Appreciate that input, Commissioner Morrison.
Is that far enough away on residential zones? I'm worried about home ownership, home values.
And once again, y'all don't have to tie all the areas together. I mean, you can think about churches separately, you can think about the parks separately, you can think about residential zones separately.
I mean, do you think your neighbors aren't smoking it right now? I mean, I don't see the difference.
One thing is smoking it, one thing is selling it.
Right.
I mean, it's more visible. You're gonna have a sign that says, "Come and get your fix here." So it's a little different than smoking it at home, and I understand what you're saying and where you're coming from. The idea that you're gonna have a facility close to a park and whoever is buying it gonna go get high when kids are over there on the park, it's no good. That's my concern. Yeah, they take it home and they do it. But when you facilitate this product to anybody that is gonna do it, they're gonna go do it at the park, which is close by.
Well, and my thought on zoning it away, a little farther away on residential is because of the crime that tends to follow where the selling establishments are located.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Paula. So, Commissioner Paula, I tend to agree with you that perhaps 300 feet isn't enough from a residential zone. So we could look at 300 feet from a church, because that's what it is for liquor now. But on the residential zone, 500 feet? Is 500 better? Or is it?
I don't know. I need to visualize that.
And then, you know, and that's in line with what Commissioner Garza said he would agree is a good number for parks, 500 feet from a park and playground.
Safety, health, and general welfare is what we're supposed to be looking after. So my idea of facility being close to the park is about safety. You have kids in the park.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yep.
there you go.
certainly. So you would have to visualize that to say, yes, I agree with 500 feet. But for now, would we be comfortable? I mean, it's obviously counter to what Commissioner Morrison's position was, but would we be comfortable talking about 500 feet from a residential zone?
Good evening, Mayor, Pro Tem Commissioners. I was just looking at the zoning map and wondering how far 500 feet would be if you were to put a business on Maybury Drive to the residential zone.
Well,
Yeah.
for a large section of it, you wouldn't have any problems.
Nope. Some commercial. Mostly. You might have
So-
one or two residences close to there, but not that many.
So Mayor, Pro Tem and Commissioners, to Commissioner Moore's point, I mean, a city block is about 300, 400 feet. So if you had, where the cursor is currently, I mean, if you had a business located there, you could theoretically locate one within almost the next block. On a 500-foot spacing. In the south side is industrial. So once you get closer north to the, just you can say Grand Avenue, it becomes a little more difficult because you start getting closer to your residential areas. And so if you made a distance requirement based off the residential areas, it would force business further to the south, closer to Maybury, if that makes sense.
But
In
isn't
this
that where
particular
most of
instance.
them are gonna go anyway?
No
think?
idea.
I mean, if
Simply
you're trying
speculating.
to catch Texas traffic.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Seems like 500 feet's the number.
Okay.
So 300 from churches, 500 from parks and residential zones is kind of the consensus? Once again, this is going to be brought back to each of your
Yeah.
respective commissions for
We're
final
not
votes.
deciding this once and
Exactly.
for all this evening.
This
I mean,
is
let's-
just trying to
as
give us a
reminder.
starting point to draft.
And someone had to say 1,000 because I had to find the ceiling. So, yeah, we are just discussing things this evening and kind of getting it close so that it can go to P and Z, and then we can look for recommendations from you at the city commission. Okay, so let's move on from distancing. Did we feel like we got enough to go with on distancing?
From the zone and from landmark standpoints, and the other question now would become distancing in between businesses. So do you want to allow?
Between cannabis establishments?
Exactly.
Okay, density. Anyone? Density.
How is that usually determined? Like per population, distance? I'm not really sure, like, how.
There is no rules.
Okay.
First time we've done this.
I'll throw a number out there. How about a mile? 1 mile.
1 mile, 5,280 feet.
Wow,
That was fast.
that was really fast. Thank you. 14
Okay, so-
blocks.
How about a mile between cannabis establishments? Commissioner Moore is the one that you fire shots at if you don't like a mile. Thoughts on that?
I'll go back again to the restrictions, and I'll probably keep harping on that all night, but, yeah, a mile is, in my opinion, it's too much, it's too restrictive. Again, the market's gonna determine the amount, of how many of these businesses thrive or survive, correct? I'm not sure, I think maybe Chief Ford might be the only one in the room who could tell us the actual market of the cannabis, consumption in Clovis. But again, I think to restrict those businesses and those licenses to within a mile, I mean, if we look at the overall square mileage of Clovis, that's probably a little much, again, in my opinion. Now, we can do that, and we can drive them out into the county, and then we can, probably not take any advantage of the GRT that they will obviously produce. So again, I think we need to keep that in mind as far as restrictions. So back to the business owner restrictions, and benefiting from what it is maybe you don't agree with or not, trying to make that a benefit for the municipality and the GRT that are obviously going to come from that. So I don't have a magic number, Mayor, but I would say.
But it's obviously less
I would say
restrictive than
less.
what I say,
less,
right?
less than 5,280.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
I
Yes.
do agree with Commissioner North also. If we put too many restrictions, they're just going to move out in the country, the county, I mean. They're going to go to the county, they're going to go to Texaco, they're going to go to Portales. So do we not want the gross receipts tax here? I think our restrictions need to be more lenient. That's my opinion.
Appreciate your opinion.
Because they will move out to the county.
Commissioner Martin, will you guys welcome that?
And Mayor, I think may it be worth mentioning again, since it's been over an hour since I did the first time. Albuquerque, the only city to adopt an ordinance so far, their distance, just for reference, is 600 feet between establishments.
Okay. Okay. You may, Chief Nolan.
Public safety. Public safety.
Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, I'm going to throw this stuff out, and then I'm going to get out of your way. I'm neither for nor against, either way. So one of the things to take into consideration when Chief Ford was talking about the impairment, please keep in mind that you have an additive effect now with impairment. Alcohol and marijuana. So with that said, there's been a lot of talk about smoking. A large majority of this is chocolates, candies made from that. And Chief Ford's group, my group, are not going to be readily identifying that at the establishment. Can they walk out and just utilize that? They could. You'd have to be under suspicion of noticing them come out to determine that. So, in the business district, we have the alcohol issue, and my concern is in the evenings. I know y'all are going to address times in a little bit, but that's going to be an issue in high-traffic areas. Now, as far as the distancing, you can allow one in 10 miles. That one is going to be a major issue for traffic because they're going to get a bunch of business in that area. So whether you have 1 or 15, they're still going to sell it. I won't get into the county and the city. That's y'all's problem. I'm sorry. I've got further issues, and those we'll have to get back with the city management, but it's a policy issue for me that's become very real. So as a city employee, my personnel are tested. They cannot utilize. But we're going to have policy issues, Justin, with the fact that our personnel, PD and fire, are going to be going in areas now and exposed to this smoke and potentially testing later positive. So that's just something we're going to have to look at internally. The other problem is, that's not me on that's Hewitt back there, so.
Stephen, do you mind muting? There we go, thank you.
Also, our other medical concern with this is the lacing of marijuana. That's going to happen. We've noticed that already, but that's being imported. Now that the product is going to be readily available, we're going to have more issue with that. That's just something to keep in mind. Again, I'm not for or against this. I just wanted to lay some of these issues out.
We appreciate that, Chief.
And if there's just one in an area, we're going to have a traffic problem.
Right.
No other advice on distances, times, or anything else. Thank you very much. Miss Claire, can I leave tonight? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chief Nolan. Appreciate that very much. Understanding that this is going to, again, go to P and Z and be discussed. A mile was thrown out. That didn't seem palatable. How about 2,500 feet or 1,000 feet between cannabis establishments? How does that strike the group?
I'm okay with 1,000.
1,000. We're okay with 1,000 over here. Commissioner Garza's comment.
I'm okay with 1,000.
1,000. Okay. So let's look at 1,000 as the density distance. Understanding that can still be discussed.
Right.
Okay. We have talked about distancing. We talked about days and hours. We talked about density, and we've talked about zoning.
So back to zoning.
Back to zoning. Okay.
All zones except for residential. So commercial, general, industrial, and central business district.
For discussion purposes, yes.
So can I ask, just out of curiosity, if we were to zone it 500, what did we decide, residential, 500?
We said let's
Or
go
not
with
decided,
500.
but, okay,
Yeah.
so
500.
500 residential, 1,000 between facilities. How many would that put potentially on Main Street?
Not very many.
Not very many.
Like more than,
Maybe
If
one,
you're going
Four?
1,000 feet in between establishments, maybe
that's
one.
every 3 blocks, right?
one or two?
Yeah, well,
Every
because of
blocks.
your residential areas too. So if
Plus
you're
you've
going-
got the churches there that they can't
Correct.
be.
So for discussion at P and Z, we would include the zones that you just listed off. Yes.
And in the downtown area, the commission, I think almost every single time with any alcohol you have down there, they've had to have a waiver for site distance for the 300 feet for alcohol. So I don't think you're going to.
You wouldn't have any.
With that, you're not going to have any.
So then,
But that's just simply on Main Street. So the Central District Business District is more than Main.
right, no, I know, but I know that's kind of the high
Correct.
wanted area. So it sounds to me like no matter what, there wouldn't be any on Main Street because
It's going to be
everything's within
difficult.
300 feet of a church.
Correct.
If that distance rule made it through, yes. I mean,
Right,
but
no,
yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So all zones
We have
except
some-
for
We have
residential.
some things to work with to begin the discussion at P and Z. Okay, very good. There's a lot of folks from the public that are here tonight that have been patient, and I would like to offer the opportunity for public input. I would like to ask that you keep that public input to just a few minutes. We've had a hand raised, Alyssa Johnson. If you would come forward, give us your name and address, and we would love to hear from you.
Hello, my name is Alyssa Johnson. I live at 2301 Ralph Boone. I own a Curry County Abstract and Title Company, and I was wanting to convey that from a title standpoint, I'm not sure how this is going to be accomplished because you can't, title insurance can't be issued on anything that's got cannabis-related income. If you're using money that was, you sold cannabis and now you're trying to buy the property or lease the property with that income. You cannot get title insurance on any place that's going to be selling it, growing it. So I don't understand how, even if we zone it, how it's possible to even have the establishments or firms or whatever in existence here. I don't know how they're doing it other places, but all I know is I've got a grip of, I guess the title they give you like title notices and it's not legal to, because of federal law, to have, sorry, I'm really nervous.
That's all right.
To have title insurance or to purchase with, unless you, of course, don't tell your title company that it's for cannabis, but then I don't know how you're gonna get away with that either, so I just wanted to throw that out.
Well, obviously, in, your industry perspective, that's, we appreciate you sharing that with us, and, my best guess is that, title insurance law is gonna have to catch up on some of this and adapt as well,
Well, it's because of federal law.
right? Yeah, there's all these complications with this, certainly, but thank you for that input. Appreciate you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. You're next, Mr. Martin. Sir, please come forward. What? You're next after this gentleman, if that's okay. If you'd give us your name and address, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Christian Flores, and I work at 321 West 7th Street, which is already a factory. It's factory direct. Pretty much, we sell like glass pipes, and I was just wondering, like, is there any sort of grandfather that's going to be into effect for the already established businesses, meaning like those smoke shops that are, there's 3 on 7th Street. So, like, is there gonna be any type of grandfather implemented for them? Like, I know that some of them have been here for like 10 years or something like that. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, no, great question, and I'm actually gonna call on our attorney, Mr. Morris, to answer that question.
So those shops are not cannabis establishments?
Yes, sir.
So they're not included in
So
this
if-
regulation? We're not given the authority to regulate those types of shops?
Yes, sir. So in terms of transitioning, you have to wait for the licensing to come out then.
Correct. You would, if I understand right, you would be
You're
like.
not gonna have to move, nothing will change for any business that's not a cannabis establishment, which is just a place that sells or grows marijuana.
Okay.
So nothing will change for you.
So, and I also had like questions on the terms of zoning on 7th Street. There's 3 smoke shops on 7th Street, and I don't know if they're from whatever distance that is, and I don't know what their deal is. But I was just wondering, that's like, it's mixed with commercial places, residents. So I was just wondering, there's like a lot of businesses and there's like a lot of residences right next to each other on 7th Street. And yeah, I haven't really talked about that street. That's a main one in Clovis.
I appreciate you bringing that up, and obviously those aren't cannabis establishments.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just asking like.
Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and Commissioners, if they wanted to transition their business to a cannabis-related business and apply for the licensing through the state, then most certainly our new ordinances would apply. And so they would have to adhere to whatever ultimately we decide. And so based off of your location currently, that may be something that you would consider from even applying for a license. You certainly would not be grandfathered in, since we have not established the rules yet in regards to a cannabis location. Current business, there is no regulations regarding that, so you're fine, but if you want to transition to a cannabis business, then most certainly you'd have to adhere to our proposed laws, and there would be no grandfathering in for that.
Yeah, thank y'all for hearing me.
Mr. Flores. Mr. Flores, you do have a resident that lives right next door to you, right? Or all around you?
Penny, there's a few people, the old shop, there's a couple businesses around there as
Right.
well. So that's why I was wondering, and they're not like pipe shops or CBD shops or anything like that, so.
Are your plans to get a license?
Yeah. So that was just a question. I had a question about 7th Street. There's a lot of, I don't know if those other shops are gonna try, but that's what we got in plan for now.
So yeah, you would certainly, based off of what this commission decides, you check those regulations, and if your particular business does not fall in location, does not fall and meet those requirements, then it's not going to be allowed.
All right, thank y'all.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being here. Mr. Audie Martin?
name's Audie Martin. I'm the Assistant State Legislative Director for Smart TD at the railroad. A couple of things, because we knew this was coming at the railroad, part of my job was to visit with other places in Colorado to see, because there was an issue when Colorado adopted this with the railroad. So I had to get involved with them and find out, you know, basically what they did wrong and what they wish they could have done better. So, as everybody knows, at the railroad, it's federal. We are not allowed to have any marijuana at all, so this is just coming from that side there. My wife is from Trinidad, Colorado. So I went up there and I visited with several of the owners of the dispensaries there. I was kind of disappointed that Trinidad, Colorado wasn't one of the places that was referenced into this discussion tonight. Trinidad put as many dispensaries as they could together. Now that was a recommendation from the police department in Trinidad. If they're closer together, you don't have to have as many police officers covering an area. One of the other things that was brought up was the disposal of these goods. Does anybody know what the time limit is that you have to dispose of marijuana? 60 days. Once that marijuana hits that shop, you got 60 days to sell it. If you don't sell it at that time, there's two options. You call the police to come get it, and the fire department comes with them. They collect it, and then they go destroy them. The other part of it is the city has now set up a committee that will go around and collect the marijuana from these dispensaries for a fee to go dispose of it. So that has increased revenue for the city there. But they don't want distance between it. They want their police officers to be able to cover several dispensaries in a certain area. I believe Tom Moore asked about how many of these are going to be sustainable. 67% of the sales in Trinidad, Colorado come from New Mexico and Texas. They are predicting that once it becomes legal in New Mexico, over 50% of their shops are going to close. There is going to be a huge amount of revenue to be made from this. I believe somebody brought up about, let's have 500 feet from residential to keep the crime down. You're not going to keep the crime down when this comes in. You're going to have more homeless people here. You're going to have more crime. You get the bad with the good. As far as times, Trinidad set their time at 8 o'clock. Most of their dispensaries are right down Main Street, where all the restaurants are. They want it shut down at 8 o'clock, get all those people off the street, so that the families can come out on the weekends and enjoy their time. The parks, they have problems in the parks with people smoking in the parks. That's where we have to have police at the parks. Going to be a lot of income from tickets, for ticketing people for doing stuff like this. So I would say instead of trying to figure out how far you're going to put them apart, where you're going to put them, how it's going to be zoned and all that, weigh the good with the bad, and then work on this other stuff from there. Thank you.
Appreciate that input, Mr. Martin. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Welcome, sir. Give us
Thank
your
you.
name and
Appreciate
address,
that.
please.
Yeah, my name is Tom Schoeneman, and we're in the process of looking at a building on 113 West First Street, which is down on the main avenue there. It's outside the general business district. And my questions are really about the application process, and I know we don't have any information on that yet. We've been trying to follow that closely, but have they set forward who is going to review these applications and how that process is going to go? Have you guys talked about that at all?
No, sir. I'm not aware of
Nothing on that.
any
Yeah,
of
I think
that
that's a little
process.
cart in front of the horse. And then more for the attorney was
you know, they are gonna have three different kinds of licenses out there. One is, you know, micro, which would be under 200 plants. So I guess, will you guys look at any of that any differently? Like from major operations to small mom and pop, something small? Thoughts on that?
Yeah,
early?
initially, yeah, it's
Okay.
probably too early, but initially, no. I mean, city attorney has advised me that we would just look at cannabis establishments, period. Is that right?
We can do both, so I don't think we can differentiate based on size of the business, but we can differentiate between types of, cannabis business.
Right.
So a producer versus a micro business versus a retail versus medical.
Right,
We can prescribe different rules, I think, in terms of zoning and distance for those ones.
okay.
It seems to me that most other cities that have regulated it kind of group them all together, but I don't think we have to do that.
Okay. That's really all I have, you know, just kind of get out in front of it and, you know, I've never been to anything like this. So even in Albuquerque, never went to a city council meeting or, this is great. It's good to see this at work, so.
Yeah, well, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
And Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, in regards to the licensing process, obviously this, from a state standpoint, the licensing will be issued through RLD. In regards to our local license, what I potentially envision is similar to when we have a business license or a business registration. I mean, somebody comes in and fills out an application, and then it circulates through our various departments that have to sign off on it. And so I would imagine we would set this up via business license versus a registration, so that, I mean, a business registration, we're capped at $35. So I'm assuming we would want to go the licensing route with this. And so we would generate some application form and then circulate it, and especially it would go through our building safety department and our planning department to make sure that whatever regulations you guys put in place are met. And of course, if they're not met, then they would not be issued the license for operation. The way that I can see this also happening is it's going to be on a first come, first served basis. So that we're obviously having to get our ducks in a row, and are trying our best to be out in front of this. But once we establish these rules and develop our application forms, it's still, once again, first come, first serve. And so if we go to one business and issue them their license, if there's a business immediately next door to it, they may not get issued the license based off the regulations.
Yep, thanks for that, Mr. Howalt. And is there any reason why we would time our license process before or after or during the state licensing process? Would they need to complete the state licensing process before they come see us?
Yeah, we're going to want to have everything in place when we have a final adoption of our ordinance. And so, once again, we're trying to get this introduced at your second meeting in July for introduction, and then adoption would be in August, which would then push us right up at that deadline of that September 1st for the state to be able to, I believe they're planning to start trying to accept license applications at that point in time for not dispensaries, but for the micro producers and the producer side of the business. And so that's when, like I said, we're trying to be out in front of it to where, it puts this business community not at risk as much to where that they can make informed business decisions.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Anyone else from the public that would like to share something? Yes, sir. If we could have your name and address, please.
My name is Richard Chambers. I live at 1401 North Main, Portales, New Mexico. I just wanted to touch base on a couple of things that you guys have talked about already. The church deal is already enacted, and every dispensary in the state of New Mexico has to be further than 300 foot from a state, or 300 foot from a church. So that's already in place. Right now, if just taking it into account what you speak of, like the Pure Life building, which I'm sure you guys see that is right across the street from Walmart, looking at zoning restrictions that, you know, people have put money and resources in to have them readily available. Having a residential requirement would take somebody that put time and effort into that out of the equation. So,
but the business you just referenced is not a cannabis establishment
currently
at this time.
Yes.
And
So, with that being said, I've personally remodeled, the old Hernandez tax building and already, submitted everything, was inspected by the state. So we'll be grandfathered in. So like, I'm just saying, like underneath those residential things that you're saying,
That's contrary to what I've been advised. Mr. Morris,
So I think he's maybe confused between current medical dispensaries and the laws that relates to those. There may be a 300-foot requirement, but without question, that requirement does not exist with cannabis establishments under the Cannabis Act, which are now going to be all medicinal marijuana dispensaries and then all the various other retail dispensaries.
appreciate that, and that's been my understanding.
okay.
And in regards to the medical dispensaries, the dispensaries that are medical related, because that's the only thing that's allowed by law currently, are grandfathered in. And so we don't have the ability to go to, say, a Pure Life, if that's currently a medical dispensary, and tell them that they have to move. It's only new licenses that are going to be issued.
Okay. Okay, very good. Yeah, thanks for that. Anything else, sir?
Yeah. So then the other thing that I was going to say as well, that if you talk about creating business and jobs, which is going to happen in this place, and touching on the hours, if you look at when you get traffic that's coming from Texas, you have to take into account that people that are getting off of work and they're coming to Clovis, New Mexico, they're going to stay in a hotel, they're going to go out to a Bandolero brewery or any of the entertainment that you have here. We need to keep that into account as well. But I did want to say that in Clovis now, at 3 o'clock on Sundays, you cannot buy cannabis. Like it's done. Like everybody operates until 3 p.m. And I think that's standard across the state. So I think that you're right along the lines with limiting those hours. But I think that taking into account people traveling from another state to come here, currently, like the dispensaries are having people travel from Oklahoma and Texas and coming in because of everything that's getting shared, saying that it's legal in New Mexico now, recreational. Well, recreational sales have not happened, but we're still getting those people traveling this way right now, expecting to be able to shop. So I think that taking that into account whenever you do think about hours, like remember your clientele that is coming this way, so.
Great, thank you for that input. Appreciate it, sir.
Yeah, thank you, yes.
Anyone else wish to share with the commission? Not seeing anyone, I would ask one last time for the good of the order, city commissioners, planning and zoning commissioners.
Mayor, if I may, Chief Ford made a point earlier. There were some questions about the licensing procedure, about disposal procedures. As far as I know, the deadline for them, for the Cannabis Control Division to come up with all those regulations is September 1st. So again, the bill leaves a lot to be desired, but the disposal procedures and some of the licensing issuance procedures I know are missing from the act.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate that. Anything else, Mr. Morris, from your perspective this evening?
What I would like to have by July 5th is some sort of template to put on the agenda for planning and zoning. So while the Planning and Zoning Commission can obviously change anything that's proposed, I still need to have some sort of a proposal, I think, to make that meeting go more smoothly and efficiently.
Okay, thank you for that.
And Mayor Pro Tem Commissioner, I think that this information, the feedback that we see this evening, that's where we'll start. And so that's what we'll get in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission for review and consideration next Thursday.
And there are some items of clarification I would like to get before I kind of take a stab at that.
Okay.
If I may. So where did we leave off on days and hours? I believe the consensus was 7 days.
Yeah.
What about hours? Was there something mentioned that I didn't hear?
Mirroring alcohol sales currently?
Mirroring alcohol sales and understanding that there might be discussion about shortening those hours.
And then there was some other items that I think I called earlier, the low-hanging fruit that I assume that we're gonna agree on, the maximum 300-foot distance between a school, daycare, et cetera, and a facility, all put in there.
Yes.
The enclosed building and no products outside provisions.
Yes.
The act does have a number of sign provisions, no off-premises advertising, no cartoonish advertising, et cetera. I plan to adopt those as well. That way, we can enforce them, you know, as a city, and if it's in an ordinance, we can do something about it.
Yes,
We don't
please
have to wait
include
for the
those
state.
things in the template, yes.
Public property prohibition, do we want to prohibit possession? Obviously, it's already illegal to smoke or consume on public property, but do we want to prohibit possession on public property?
Your thoughts, Chief, on that one?
And Mayor Pro Tem, and Commissioners, I would say that something of that nature doesn't impact folks trying to establish a business. That's something that we can think about and decide. We don't have to decide this evening on, because whether we enact it today or we enact it in 3 months from now, that's not going to put somebody out of business.
That's a great point. It
Is
does
that
not
fair?
have to be decided now. And then the last thing was I plan on incorporating some of the odor control requirements that other municipalities have used. I assume that those will come down later on September 1st, whenever they have to regulate that, but I would like to put that in the ordinance as well.
Okay, yes, please do. And the public possession piece, if you want to include that so that P and Z can discuss that?
I'm not sure if P and Z, that would be under their purview because it's not a zoning matter.
Okay.
And
All right.
we're currently doing a
Let's deal
code
with that later.
overhaul anyway with our criminalization ordinances for marijuana, so we'll put that in there.
Okay, and I'm getting tired and it's late and I may have missed it, but the advertising piece off premises, you mentioned that, and please include that in the template. Okay, thank you. Anything else, sir?
No.
Okay, very good. Anything else from city management?
No, I just thank you to each of one of you for your time this evening. It definitely gives us a great base to put something together for y'all's consideration. Like I said, trying to get out in front for the businesses to have something to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to those of you that have attended to either listen or provide input. P&Z commissioners, city commissioners, appreciate the spirited debate. And thank you for your time. We are adjourned.